Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Walk With Them podcast. This is a podcast produced by Urban Saints, and we're back with another special episode. We've got a special guest today, Naomi Wadsworth from Open Doors Youth. So we're really excited to talk to her. And as usual, I am joined by my co-host Nesu, who is our youth culture specialist. And for those who don't know, I am Paris, the digital lead at Urban Saints. So yes, we're going to have a very exciting conversation today and get to know about another organisation. So yeah, we're just going to kick things off. Nesu, would you like to go ahead and just kind of give us a brief intro into what we're going to be discussing?
Yes, we are going to be talking about this concept of being my brother's keeper. It's so funny at the very inception of the narrative, the biblical narrative, we have God asking Cain, "Hey, where's Abel?" And he's like, "Listen, what's that's not my business. Like that's not my problem," kind of thing. And all throughout the Bible, we find out that actually it is your business. And so we're going to be looking at that through the lens of the ministry of Open Doors and specifically Open Doors Youth. But I'm going to read a scripture that gives us a little bit of a context or a background to be able to leap off today. So this is 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 26. It says, this is in the context of spiritual gifts and, being part of one body and having different parts. It says, if one part suffers, all the parts suffer with it. And if one part is honored, all the parts are glad. And so that's what we're going to be kind of investigating and scrutinizing this morning. But yeah, I'll head over to Paris and let you, kind of lead us into the first question.
Yeah, so Naomi, thank you again for joining us today. So could you tell us what Open Doors, the organisation, is all about? What does the mission entail? What are the values? Yeah, and just how you're involved in that organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, guys. It's great to be able to join you. So Open Doors is a ministry, it's a charity that supports the persecuted church around the world. It started in the 1960s by a guy called Brother Andrew, who some of you might have heard of. He's written a book called God Smuggler, which is the kind of book which a lot of people read as a teenager and are like, oh, wow, like God can use like one person to do a lot of stuff. And that's exactly kind of what happened with Brother Andrew, in that he became a Christian and felt called to go and to strengthen what remains. And this was in the context of Eastern Europe, where there was communism taken over and the church was being very much strangled. Lots of places being shut down, and he could see just that churches that were around still were really struggling to survive. And so he started a ministry of smuggling Bibles behind the Iron Curtain. And his legacy is that he did this for years and never once had a Bible found. He got stopped and searched at pretty much every border, and he would pray what he calls the smuggler's prayer. God, in the Bible, you made blind people see, but now I need you to make seeing eyes blind. And time again, guards would search his car, search his van, and they would never find the Bibles.
Wow.
And yeah, I know, it's kind of nuts.
Yeah.
But yeah, today Open Doors is supporting Christians around the world who pay the cost for following Jesus. And here in the UK, we're kind of working to connect the church globally who are facing that persecution with the church here in the West, where we have very limited cost to following Jesus. We have like a little saying that we want to see a strong church that's defying persecution, standing together and sharing Jesus no matter the cost. And for me, that is a challenge, because often I don't actually like thinking about the cost of following Jesus. Kind of like thinking about comfort, and ultimately that is not what we're called to as Christians, but it's sometimes what is attractive. And that's what the persecuted church keeps teaching me, is that actually like there's no space for comfort here. There is space for obedience, and ultimately Jesus is worth giving everything for. And they time and time again prove to me that that is the reality. And my job at Open Doors is that I lead our youth team, and that involves both equipping young people and youth workers with all that they need to both understand what the persecuted church is and take action to support them.
Okay. So it seems like your organization is rooted with a lot of history, and even that little brief story that you told was actually quite kind of captivating and interesting. So I love that. I was going to say as well, I think you're right where in England we don't really face a lot of consequences for being Christian. We can, practice our faith quite comfortably. So it's really interesting that your organization gets us to kind of think outside of our own box and consider others of the faith. So yeah, I'm really excited to kind of learn a bit more about how exactly you go about sharing and teaching about that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think particularly for young people,
Mm.
often they think that their experience of church and being a Christian is the only experience because that's all
Yeah.
they've experienced themselves. And so, they can be tempted into thinking being a Christian is boring. Being a Christian is something that I just do on Sundays. It's something my parents make me do, rather than thinking through the idea of like this relationship is something that demands everything. Like,
Yeah.
Jesus in the Bible says, you know what, you can't even turn back to go and bury your parents. You've got to give me everything. And that's costly. That's really costly. But he also talks about, anything that you give up here is given back to you. And I think the church in the West, in many respects, is well, our persecuted brothers and sisters often say that we're tempted by different things. We're tempted by this carrot of comfort.
Mm.
Often, Christians in places where it costs them to be a Christian are like, hey, I'm tempted by safety because I know that if I follow Jesus, actually, it's going to mean that I potentially am kicked out of my family, or I'm arrested and imprisoned, or sometimes even killed to make that decision.
Mm.
So I'm tempted by the safety, but actually, like, I've got to be, if I'm going to be obedient to Jesus, then I've got to be willing to go through that, knowing that actually He's a God who's called me. Here in the UK, we are definitely tempted by comfort. Like,
Yeah.
I'd much rather be safe and like just like known as a nice person rather than
Mm.
actually stand up for what is Jesus actually asking me to do in this situation. And for young people, we want to help them to understand that there is both a joy in following Jesus but there is a cost. Like, we are no
Mm.
longer our own. The call is to deny, like to pick up your cross, deny yourself and follow Jesus. And that both brings great reward in that. There is like purpose and meaning to our lives, but it's not easy. But then the call is not to live a safe faith, it's to live a brave faith where we can trust
Mm.
that God guides us. And so, yeah, my department, we create a number of resources around helping young people to like connect with stories, but ultimately wanting them to connect their own faith with the fact that we serve a God of the impossible who can do far more with our lives than we can. And when I remember that, I'm like, oh yeah, that is what I want. But I think, it's when we live in a culture and sometimes in a context where it's sometimes easier and safer to be quiet and just to, conform to the culture around us. We need people who are living it out to remind us of what it's actually like to follow Jesus.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's so good. Yeah, as you both alluded to, in the Western world, we have a conception of Christianity largely that is characterized by affluence, opportunity, and religious freedom. So we're not in touch with what the other side of following Jesus really looks
Mm.
like sometimes. And it's helpful. I've been following Open Doors for a long time. And almost every week when I read some of these stories, it gives me faith and courage in a different way. So when I, for example, go out in evangelism and I get rejected by someone, honestly, I can laugh it off. I'll be like, if that's really what you call, persecution, I'll give you a story from Open Doors. You find out what it really means to pay the cost. You know what I mean? It really puts things in perspective. And yeah, it's so helpful that way. And it's funny. I was listening to someone speaking, and they said something really interesting. It was actually a guy called James Elorado. He said, "Well, if you are connected to the body, and your eye, if you're like in the human body, if your eye hurts, there's no way your hand won't be affected. That pain will filter through the whole body. So if someone's suffering and they're part of the body across the world and you don't feel it, I have to question whether you're attached to the body. And it changed my life. I said, wow, that's powerful. So in that context, I want to find out from you, in the spirit of trying to inspire young people to engage with these issues and this angle, and also just trying to look out for their brothers and sisters across the world, who are paying the higher cost. So have you any stories or examples where you feel like young people have been inspired within our context? Do you have any examples that could really show what can happen when we rope young people in?
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned this idea of like you've got to make it real for young people. So like using stats is, sometimes a helpful context, but it's not personal. I can talk about the fact that 388 million Christians are persecuted for their faith, and that's like just totally overwhelming. But when I share a story of like, this is how it's impacted a teenager like you who is still choosing to follow Jesus, even though it's meant that they've been kicked out of their family. Like we often use a story of a young person from Iran who they basically came home from school one day. Their whole house was being searched by the secret police because their dad was a secret Bible smuggler. And just the reality of like, in that context, the dad was arrested, and she had a choice. Am I going to keep following Jesus and trust that he's in the midst of this, or do I just like be like, God, I can't believe you're letting this happen. I don't want to believe in you anymore. I don't want to trust in you. And for her and her family, they just were like, we've got nothing else to hold on to. We have to trust that God is in control. And her dad was in one of the worst prisons and was pulled up in front of a judge and told, look, if you sign this document saying that you won't talk about Jesus anymore, you can go free. If you don't, you go back to prison, and goodness knows what will happen to you and to your family. And he, in that space, instead of signing the document, wrote on the document, God is love. And amazingly, the judge let him go free. Wow. And I know, kind of nuts. And then for this young girl, she was like, oh, we kind of thought that would be the end of it. But we realized that, our whole family is still under surveillance. And so we've had to pack up in the middle of the night and escape and get moved to another country. But even in the midst of that, I know that God is faithful. And like, when you can share stories of like, this isn't just like adults, because I think sometimes when you're a young person, you're like, when I'm a grown up, then I'll take my faith seriously. Actually, for a lot of young people, that's not the case. They are absolutely going for it with God right now, which is so good to see. But for many, it's like, oh, well, like this is like something that I do right now. And then if I really like want to, when I'm a bit older, I'll give it my all. And I think trying to show them that actually there's plenty of young people who it's costly for them to follow Jesus now. And they're making that hard choice now, and they can make that hard choice now. That is the starting point. And we see like the impact of sharing those stories massively. Like we've got a little group of young people who've joined a little program that we run called Youth Reps, where they become like a little rep for their youth group, talking about the persecuted church, where we're always saying like, there are a whole load of ways that you can use your skills, your time to speak up for the persecuted church. And normally in that whole category of pray, act and give if you want to. So like praying, like we've got young people who literally have committed to praying every week for the top 50 countries where Christians experience the worst persecution. So every year, Open Doors, that's kind of one of the big pieces of research that we're known for, is the World Watch List. And there's 50 countries on there. There's actually like, we monitor like things in about 75 different countries, but we publish the top 50. And so we've got young people who are saying every week, I'm going to pray for one of these countries on the World Watch List. Got young people who are not just praying themselves, but also sharing things in their church services and saying, right, this week we're praying for this country. I've done some research. Like, this is what I want us to be praying for Christians in this nation. We've got people, young people who are leading little sessions, whether it's at their youth group or at their school in their CU, about what it's like to be a Christian around the world. And we've got young people who are doing some nuts fundraising challenges. Like, you know, we've had young people who've shaved their heads, or who've slept outside, or who've like done like some pretty insane endurance challenges, and recognizing that actually even what they're doing is like just a fraction of what some of what their brothers and sisters go through. Like, we had a youth group who decided that they would try and cycle from, like, Nigeria is one of the countries where like there are more Christians killed for their faith in Nigeria than in anywhere else across the world. And they decided that, okay, because of that, we are going to like cycle the width of Nigeria, but obviously in miles in the UK. And so, like, as a youth group, they like collectively worked out, okay, well, what would it look like for us to break it down, and everyone does their little bit, and together they not only like were connecting and being able to pray for the family, their Christian family in Nigeria, but were also able to just understand like how this massive country is experiencing persecution on a scale which is pretty surprising to a lot of people, and they raise a whole load of money as well. So yeah, a whole range of different ways where young people are being able to utilize what God's given them for the good of the persecuted church.
Yeah, that's so good. And it seems like it's a real opportunity for them to kind of just widen their perspective on life in general, but in terms of like faith as well. And yeah, just it's so great that like people are able to kind of do these challenges and trying to, have a way into seeing the impact of something. Like even that bike riding challenge was really good. Yeah, it's really interesting. That's really great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that we also see is like just young people who kind of get a hold of this, and it just inspires their own faith. So, you know, we've
Yeah.
had a number of young people off the back of hearing some of this have been like, oh, my takeaway is that I want to be bolder in sharing with my friends. None of them know I go to church. So I want to be bolder in just saying, oh, I go to church. Do you want to come to youth group with me? And
Yeah.
inviting people, praying for their friends. We have like a little resource called Brave Faith, which is a 6-week devotional booklet, which is like just takes people through, well, what is it to actually make brave choices, and to actually choose the outset, okay, God, I'm willing to follow you even if it's costly. What is it to pray brave prayers, like ones where actually you're like, I need God to actually like to do something. I can't just, it's not like a God just bless me today. It's like, actually, okay, God, this situation where I really need you to do something. What is it to trust God that he will change something in us, and pray like brave prayers around being able to say, okay, I know I'm not the person I want to be, but I trust that you're a God who can make me into that person, to take brave action. And so, yeah, each week of that, there's a story from the persecuted church. There's a little link to the Bible in terms of what does scripture say about this. And there's a practical challenge, like how could you be living this out? And one of those is like in week 2, it's all about praying for 3 of your friends who don't yet know Jesus. And then in week 5, it kind of comes back to it and says, okay, you've been praying for them for 3 weeks. This week, why don't you actually like just tell them you've been praying for them and invite them to something? And just that whole thing of like, sometimes you need a little bit of the impetus. You need a little push to like give it a go, and to see, well, what's the worst that can happen. People say no, that's okay.
Yeah.
Like, no one's died.
Yeah.
I was going to say just a caveat from that then, because obviously you can be dealing with, I guess, quite sensitive topics as well when you are sharing about persecution and, the experiences of others. So like, what age range do you kind of tackle in terms of introducing that concept to young people, and how do you go about them not being fearful that, oh no, this could happen to me because I'm a Christian too? How do you kind of strike that balance with the young people?
Well, we actually also create resources for kids,
Yeah.
but everything is kind of like scaled to the point where it's like, okay, well, for kids we talk a lot about, well, what's it like to be bullied, and there are some people who are bullied for their faith, and that kind of being a concept that is translatable. For young people, we are very conscious about, we don't share everything. You know, there are some pretty horrendous stories which are just not appropriate, and particularly if it's just like a one-off kind of, you're doing a one-off session, it's like, well, actually, it's probably not going to be helpful. But I think quite often what we're trying to contrast is this idea about what is it to be, exactly what Nissi was saying at the start about being the body of Christ, is that all of us has a role to play. And actually, like, for many Christians around the world, their role to play is to follow Jesus boldly, and it will come with a sometimes physical cost, sometimes it's discrimination. But here in the UK, actually, it is safe. It's safe to be a Christian. You're not going to get arrested for talking about your faith. And particularly for young people, there are opportunities for them to understand, there may be consequences. You might be bullied for telling people you're a Christian, but actually there are points where it's like ways of being able to talk to your teachers, talk to like responsible adults that you trust about what's going on, so that you are protected in that way. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong to tell people that you're a Christian, because actually God might be wanting to use your life as a little bit of a testimony to people who are like, even if this costs me, it's worth following Jesus for. But I think you're completely right in asking the question of like, how do we help to nuance things? I think a lot of that is around, well, if the call to follow Jesus is to give everything, then that is the call that is for everyone. That's not just for Christians in these countries where it's really costly. That's a call here as well. But often that looks different. Like the call to follow Jesus in the UK, it's like, actually, just telling my neighbours, sometimes I can be a bit like, oh, I don't want to tell you because I don't want you to think I'm weird. But like there's points where it's like that is the same call, and being able to help young people to recognise there's not like tiers of, oh, you're a really good Christian because, you know, you've made the decision to follow Jesus, even if it means this, this, and this. Actually, here in the UK, like that decision to follow Jesus, no matter the cost, is still the same. That is what is on offer. It's not just about turning up on Sundays. It's not just about like, I don't know, coming to a youth group. All those are all good things. But to be a Christian is to say, God, you're in control and I'm not. And that is costly. And we want young people to know that wherever they are.
Yeah. Okay, so on in that vein of things then, what advice would you give to youth leaders who want to encourage their young people to play active kind of roles in thinking about their brothers and sisters in different countries and ways to support them? What advice would you give?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. I think first of all, young people really connect with like the passion that you have, and particularly if you're leading, like they can see like what's just like, oh, we're just doing a session on this, and what's something that you genuinely care about. So I think there's points where it's like, for yourself, like, are you passionate about the global church? And if you're not, that's, you know, to be honest, like before I started working for Open Doors, I didn't know loads, and so I couldn't be passionate because I just didn't have the knowledge. And so I think there's points where like actually clocking, okay, where do I need to up my own engagement and understand a little bit more, so that I'm speaking from a place of real authenticity, and I'm speaking from a place where actually God's speaking to me and challenging me and changing me. I think that is probably the most powerful thing to be able to then pass on to your young people, because then it's like, it's not just this is a session that we've done, we've ticked a box. It's far more of like, oh God, you've used something of this to speak to me, and I want to be investing that into those that I lead. So first things first, learn a bit more for yourself. And if you're already like, I'm super passionate about the persecuted church, great. Let your young people see that and be able to share in that with you. And it might be that like actually it's not like the whole global church. Maybe you've got a real passion for a country or for a specific kind of challenge that Christians face. Like I've been connecting with a youth worker who's got a real passion for people who are in prison for their faith. And it might just be that actually you want to focus in on being able to share that part with your young people. But as I say, it's kind of got to be like a little bit authentic from you, of like, oh, I see the value in this, and I'm willing to allow it to change me, as well as wanting to pass it on. So that's point one. Point two, I think, is ultimately my job is to create free resources. So we have got loads of free things for youth workers, particularly to help you to know where to start. So whether that's like doing a little quiz night, we've developed a whole quiz that you can do, which will help your young people to understand what's happening in different parts of the world. But we've also got session plans for, like, if you're doing like either a Sunday morning or a Friday night youth group, things that are like either super interactive because you've got loads of time and space, or things that are a little bit more kind of focused and linked back to the Bible. But I think being able to know that you've got resources that are ready to use and have been written by people who actually know what they're talking about, that is also helpful. So you're not having to start from scratch. And so, yeah, if people want that, it's on our website, which is youth.opendoorsuk.org. And they're all free there to download. And then I think the final thing is like tapping into where you've got young people who've got passions themselves, and recognizing who's in your group, like what do they have. If you've got like some young people who are like super passionate evangelists, then like almost like using some of these stories to spur them on and to further encourage and inspire them. If you've got some young people who are like really into kind of like doing some like praying, then being like, cool, this is a way that we can structure your prayer life a little bit more about praying for the global church. If you've got young people who are like just, you know, your standard young people and are like super into playing football, that's great, because we've got a World Cup coming up where there are a number of countries that are on the World Watch list that there are Christians there who need prayer. And utilising some of those spaces where it's like there's just obvious crossover. But yeah, I think a lot of this is around helping youth leaders to see that actually not only do they want to be talking about the standard issues that young people go through, but actually helping them to have a global perspective is something that can really be great at building those foundations of what faith can look like for the long term.
Yeah.
So good. That is so good. Yeah, I mean, you know what? I think we've touched some really important points here, not least the fundamental point that we do have a responsibility as a family to do life together. You know, again, the scriptures say, you know, share one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. We can't just, you know, sort of sideline what's going on with the rest of half of the family, or even more than half of the family across the globe. So Naomi, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for signposting your resources and your work. I thoroughly commend the work of Open Doors to everyone listening. It's an amazing ministry. And we thank the Lord for it. So yeah, this has been another episode of the Walk with Them podcast. We look forward to more chats. Please continue to follow us and tune into the conversations, and let's continue to grow, evolve, and equip one another and spur one another on. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye, guys.